That's right, we now still don't actually have missiles and Trailmakers. Um, yeah, I don't know what people are on, but but they're definitely on something when they claim that now we can make missiles. Don't get me wrong, distance sensors allow you to do some crazy amazing things. For example, in this background footage, you can see me firing technically a rocket instead of a missile, and hitting something 1 full kilometer away, and the rocket taking a more advanced path than just a straight line to the target. And this is only possible because of the distance sensors. But I also have a lot of math to back up my claim of the distance sensors not allowing you to make actual air-to-air missiles. I have said this way back, all the way back in 2023, and I will stand by this claim today. The issue was never the range of the distance sensors. The issue was never the distance sensors or anything related to them. It was always how people used them that was the problem. Specifically, how many you choose to cram onto a missile. But because that's a lot of math, and I know a lot of you don't like doing math, let's focus on the cool rocket. I'm going to be calling it a missile though. This cool missile that I have here that I'm showing to you. I've decided to call it the Jav on account of it being like the Javelin, but without a few parts. So just like the name, some of its capabilities are cut off. It doesn't actually track the enemy. It can't make any corrective maneuvers to hit the enemy. Therefore, it's not a missile, it's a rocket. However, just like the Javelin, wherever you point it, it has the option to do a top attack, which basically means that it can go up and then come down on the target. In real life, this is a useful tool to destroy tanks. Tanks have really strong frontal armor, but they don't expect to be hit from the top side. So, naturally, what some missiles do is to take advantage of the thin top armor, is that they go up and they come down on the tank, therefore hitting it from a weak spot. This system does something similar, and it is accurate, well rather the distance sensor only allows it to calculate a path up to 1 kilometer. And as you can see in the video behind me, it definitely can deal some good damage. It's not perfect by any means, but it's still pretty damn amazing. And even more importantly, I have specifically designed the system to be able to be easily mounted to any other vehicle that you so choose. I will be uploading both the finalized version and the version with all the color-coded logic gates for ease of use and easy modification. I will have a brick of text in the comments pinned so that you can see how to apply it to your vehicle, and also the specifications of it and how to use it and other such things. Because I know a lot of people don't want to sit through me talking for 5 minutes about the details of the logic gate system. So instead, I'm just going to quickly skim through how the missile works, and then I'm going to talk about why true missiles that can actually track the target are still, practically speaking, impossible in Trailmakers. The way that this missile works is that you have the angle sensor on the launcher, and you have the angle sensor on the missile. From there, it just stores the signal from the launcher and puts it in the missile through a set of accumulators, and then it uses that to set what angle it should fly at. From there, there's the dark green set of gates, which control the distance from the launcher to the target. Then there's the set of light green gates, which measures how far the missile has flown. And then after that, it's simply adding them together and running a comparison. The exact scaling of these accumulators here to store the values is very specific due to the fact that it has to fly not in a straight line, but at a slight angle. So you end up with this kind of triangle flight path, where you're at point A, enemy is point B, your distance sensor tells you this distance here from you to the enemy, and then the missile has to know this length based off of this length, And then at point C, it has to know this length also based off of this length. I just hard-coded this into the accumulators as a value to scale all the inputs by. And this is a pretty simple trigonometry solving question, especially since I use 30 degrees, which is a very, very common question which has been solved a lot of the time. And that's really it. Once it hits point C, it triggers a thing which causes it to pitch down by 60 degrees, pointing at the target again, and that's really it. I will note that the final version does have one slight modification. It adds an extra 50 meters to the distance sensor due to the fact that it has to account for the fact that at the turn, the missile will not make a perfect 1000 G turn in a fraction of a second, but it still takes a small amount of time to turn. So adding up that little bit of distance will cause it to account for the extra speed that the missile has to engage that turn. Now, the more interesting part of this missile is, well, the warhead. As I'm sure you saw in these background videos, it fires a burst of lasers before it hits the target. The lasers are hooked up to fire directly after the turn, so that once it makes the turn and starts pointing towards the target, it drills a hole into the top of the target, and then it detonates. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and a lot of the time it is not accurate enough to be able to hit the enemy with lasers, but on stationary targets, that laser burst does a number on their armor and really allows the TNT to get in there. Sometimes the lasers alone are enough to core out a vehicle. I currently call this warhead last bang, on account of the lasers followed by a bang, and it's been pretty effective, and as a whole, is a pretty cool and interesting system. Again, the entire instruction set for modifying the missile and mounting it to a vehicle is in the comments. So if you have questions on how to change out the warhead, how to make it launch from a different keybind, or other such things, just look down there. Now, as for why it is practically impossible to make an accurate missile that works in Trailmakers, well, it's bad when I have to pull out 3D Desmos. The problem is that most people view the area that the missile can see as a cone, as shown here. The issue, naturally, is that this is completely wrong. So imagine, in this case, that the missile is currently in the very center. As you can see, the missile here can move back and forth. Again, imagine that that's where the missile is coming from. The thing is, the cone is not an accurate representation of what the missile can see. The missile cannot see the full cone. All the missile can really see is simply two bands, because the missile only has 4 distance sensors. At least most missiles only have 4 distance sensors. And as you can see, whether you increase the FOV or if you decrease the FOV, the point still stands that it doesn't see a cone. A cone is an approximation of what it can see. In reality, you can only see what the distance sensors see, which means a very, very small gap of vision. And what that means is that it only sees the circle. When a missile spins, which is the usual way of doing it, it sees everything within that ring. And that's what I want to model and show to you, that it is mathematically impossible, or it is effectively mathematically impossible, to get any reasonable amount of accuracy with a missile. So let's imagine the FOV. Let's assume that the FOV is 60 degrees, as you can see here. We are checking whether or not we can detect the target 200 meters away from the distance sensor. It'd be like 150 meters down and 100 to the right, but like a straight line from the distance sensor to the target, let's assume 200 meters. This means that the entire distance across is 200 meters here, which means that the radius from here to here is 100 meters. If you look at the circle here, that means that the distance of the entire thing is 200, and as I just said, the halfway point to the side, that is 100 meters. So let's open up the Blessed Desmos and look at what we have here. As you can see here, this radius of the circle is supposed to be the same thing as this circle here, as I have shown. We're assuming that the missile is spinning, and that it can be pointing at any one spot in this ring, using one of its 4 sensors. So, if we look here, let's be nice. I am going to set it at 100, and we will assume a diameter of the target to be 6 meters. So as you can see, this is supposed to be a target. I can move the target, and if I move the target onto the radius, onto the edge of the circle, and zoom in, you can see that its diameter, the distance across it, is approximately the same as the amount of space it takes up on the circle. So let's plug that into the equation. Here we see the amount of sensors. To start with, I'll just imagine one sensor. Then we have how much space that the target takes up on the circle, and then the circumference of the circle, which is defined here, and then times 100 to get a percent. So with one sensor, with the full 6 meters of the target being perfectly placed on the circle, we get 1% chance of detecting it. You can start seeing the problems here. Now, let's assume that the target isn't perfectly on the thing. Let's assume that the target only has like an edge on the circle, either on the inside edge or outside edge. What if the target is out here? What if the target is out here? What I'm calculating here is the chance of detecting per frame. And realistically speaking, you're only going to have 1 or 2 frames of potentially detecting the target. And even then, there's no guarantee that it will align perfectly along there's no guarantee that the sensors will align perfectly with the target. So if we simulate that by dropping this down to, like, let's say 2, you know what, no, I'll be generous, 3, and that's how much is on the circle as it's spinning, and the 4 distance sensors can be anywhere here. Increase this up to 4 to simulate 4 distance sensors, we still only have a 2% chance. As we can see here, stuff is really going downhill for the statistics. The only reasonable way is, like, even if you have 12 distance sensors, even if you have the target lined up perfectly so that, like, no, I'll be really generous. We're talking about a really big target, full 10 meters on it. That's still only a 20% chance of spotting it per frame at this distance, in this position. And the missile is only going to have 1 or 2 frames as it sweeps by. Because if you remember, the circle starts off big, then shrinks. Just as how you can see in this visualization here, the circle at this edge here starts off big as the missile is far away, and then shrinks. And as it's shrinking, it will only get a couple of frames to spot the target. So, I have, using this math, designed what I believe to be the most effective possible seeker while keeping the missile small. So first of all, we are assuming a 45-degree angle to each side, according to this seeker setup I have here. Uses 12 distance sensors, and the full FOV is 90 degrees. So if I quickly plug that in, we get this value for the diameter of the circle. Now, let's assume that it detects the target at 150 meters to the side. We are assuming that you can shoot it accurately enough to the point where that's where the distance sensors will cross through the target. Again, if you're less accurate, that number will increase, and that will decrease your accuracy by a lot. But again, just an approximation, let's say that you are somehow accurate enough to get it within 150 meters. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that you're really good at estimating where the missiles will go. As you can see here, the total length is 212, so we're going to be plugging in 106 the radius here. And let's put an accurate measurement of what type of targets you'll be shooting at. I have found that on average, like 4 meters in diameter is a good approximation for most aerial targets, because sure, if you look at a plane from the top side, it may have a big surface area, but if you look at a plane directly from behind or from the side, where the long, thin wings aren't really visible and they don't add to the surface area, 4 meters is a good enough approximation. As I said in my example, as you can see here, 12 distance sensors is the amount of distance sensors I managed to cram onto the system while keeping it relatively reasonable. So let's assume that it's, again, just here's a visualization, it's on the thing, 4 meters. What are the chances of it detecting a target per frame? 7%. 7%. To be clear, if you want to have any reasonable chance of detecting the target, 50% is like the minimum. So let's assume that you are really, really good at taking the missile shots. Let's say you manage to get the missile within 50 meters of the target. It'll be looking something like this. Same target size, and let's say we have 20 whole distance sensors. That's barely a 25% per frame to detect the target. Not even 50%. I have said this before, and I will say this again. I have said, back all the way in 2023, the issue is not the range of the distance sensors. The issue was never the range of the distance sensors. The issue has always been and will always be with the density of the distance sensors. You are talking about a singular ray shooting out. You are not talking about a cone of vision. You are talking about a single pixel of vision. And that decreases how much you can see and detect by an order of magnitude. I'm not saying that distance sensor-based missiles are impossible. Under some conditions, if you're really good at estimating where the target will go, and you can get the missile close enough, and you tune everything correctly to maximize the statistics of spotting it per frame. And by the way, to clarify, this isn't a perfect equation. This equation still has problems, and it only really works accurately for smaller values, but it gets the job done to get an approximation. This whole system, it's possible. As I just showed here, the chances aren't obscenely low, but they're still low enough to the point where it's completely impractical. So sadly, yeah, the distance sensors aren't going to be a magical solution. The distance sensors aren't going to fix all your problems. The distance sensors do allow some amazing things, like these Javelin missile launchers, but it's not going to make functional air-to-air missiles. I would also like to say sorry for all the delays on making this video and like all the other delays. I'll be putting up a community post to see what video you want to see next, since I actually have a couple of creations that I can make videos on. I have a feeling that, maybe seeing what people want will give me more motivation. Also, I recently got some time freed up, so I might actually be able to make some videos at a more reasonable rate. But yeah, that's about it. Goodbye.